Hey, good morning, Morai Rabotai. We are continuing on Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim, Hilchot Tefillin, and we are starting Siman Lamed Vav. Just like its friend Siman Lamed Bet, this is going to be primarily the halachot of Safrut, intended mainly for the making of the Tefillin and the writing of the Otiot, Surat HaOtiot, but it is of supreme importance for a person to know the basics, at least, of the halachot of Safrut, to know what is at least the question, what should be alarming a person in the Sefer Torah, when you get a bracha, in your mezuzot, when you open and take a look at them, and so on. Says, Shulchan Aruch, צריך לדקדק בכתיבת האותיות, שלא תשתנה צורת שום אחת מהן, ולא תדמם לאחרת. A person should be very careful in writing of the otiot of the tefillin in this case, but really the same thing is with mezuzah and Sefer Torah as well, that the shape and the look of no one of the letters should look like another one, and also that each one should look like what it's supposed to be looking like. Says the Shulchan Aruch, the Rama adds, לכתחילה יכתוב בכתיבת המה, כמבואר בטור ובשאר פוסקים, והוא ידוע אצל הסופרים, מיהו אם שינה בצורת הכתב, אינו פסול. So the לכתחילה, you should write with all of the diktukim, as we're going to discuss some of them, but some of the changes are not necessarily going to invalidate the ktiva, the writing, which again, some of them we're going to discuss. Those basic ones that make a major difference are things that we're going to try to discuss as we come close to the end of this Siman. And the Chafetz Chaim, the Mishna Berurah, in his Kuntras Mishnat Sofrim, is going to discuss it more at length, which we're going to try to cover as well. Now, interestingly, by the way, when it comes to Surat HaOtiot, the Bet Yosef, Maran, in Bet Yosef, enumerates all of the details of halacha in the Surat HaOtiot of the Ashkenazim. If you take a look at the Sefer Torah Ashkenazi, and you see how the Otiot are, the Shin and the other ones, slightly different than the one we have, especially when you talk about Tzaddik and other Otiot that look almost completely different in the shape of the Yud, the backward Yud that you have, and so on. So Maran does not bring the Sephardi Ktav. The Sephardi Ktav that we call Ktav Meshidah, it's not really mentioned in the Bet Yosef. Maran teaches the writing of what we call the Ktav Ashkenazi, and the Sephardim is based on Zohar and Kitva Arizal. Now, Chazon Ish, Alav Shalom, he argued that the Zohar and the Ari HaKadosh, the writings of the students of Ari, are not legitimate. They are perhaps mizuyaf, they are forgery, and therefore he felt that the Ktav of the Sfaradim, this is you need a lot of shoulders to say such a thing, to even think such a thing. The Chazon Ish held that it's not with the legitimacy that it should be, and therefore he advised against it. He actually, for health reasons, had to spend some time every year in, I believe it was Sfat, and the place that he visited, of course, had a mezuzah. So even though that he was there for a short time and he was renting and so on, he would change the mezuzah when he went there and change it with his own mezuzah that he will bring for even a short period of time because of this. Now, in Lishkat HaSofrim in Eretz Yisrael, Rabbi Yashiv, to some extent, was mindful of this as well, but many who came after the Chazon Ish writes this, to my knowledge, in 5 different places in his writings. This is one of those things that he did not suffice writing only one place, but nevertheless, the ones who came afterwards showed how Chatam Sofer, Rabbi Shlomo Kluger, some of the luminaries, the top Shura Rishona, Gedolei Ashkenaz, they sent Sifrei Torah to their students, written with the Ktav of the Sfaradim, Tefillin they sent, and so on. They all legitimized the writing of the Ari HaKadosh, the Zohar HaKadosh, and all that comes with it. And again, the Ktav of the Sfaradim, even prior to the time of Ari HaKadosh, you find many Ktavim of Sifrei Torah of hundreds of years ago in the Ktav that we have, known as the Ktav of the Sfaradim. So therefore, of course, one cannot be motzilaz on the Ktav of the Sfaradim that has been around for many generations and hundreds, if not thousands of years. But nevertheless, there is some point of contention there among the poskim around this question of why is it that Maran Bet Yosef, who is the source of Sfardi Halacha in Bet Yosef, Siman Lamed Vav, does not bring really the surah of the Ktav of what's known as Sfaradim for right now. And again, in some opportunity, maybe we'll discuss this a little more, but now we're just going to do the basics of the Siman. The Mishna Berurah writes, the Chafetz Chaim, בכתיבת, והוא הדין אם נשתנה האות מצורתה, אחר הכתיבה על ידי נקב או קרע או טשטוש. It's not just the writing that has to be proper, but even after writing, a person should be careful with damages to the mezuzah and so on. Just yesterday, since we have learned some of these halachot and we have spoken about this, people are actually checking their tefillins and mezuzahs and so on. So yesterday, one of our main members came and he mentioned that the mezuzah of the outdoor that they opened, it was not completely disintegrated, but close to something like that. It was full of holes and damages and rips all over the place, and the writing was incoherent. Basically, you couldn't make some of the words out, especially with the outdoor mezuzah, especially if it's hit by sun and you don't have a weatherproof thing. You definitely 100% should check it, and you should check it every year. And as we mentioned before, we gave guidelines of what type of mezuzah cover to use to minimize the damage and so on. So even tishtush, nekev, ukera, the damages that are done by ripping, by rips, by holes, or just having, another case we had, somebody had put a mezuzah without proper cover on the door of the garage, and it was in a way that it was completely exposed to rain, and the rain had gotten into the saran wrap, but did not get out because it was trapped inside. So you can imagine how the mezuzah looked like after they opened it. Even those that could open and was not stuck and completely ripped apart the otiot. But that's what happens in one rain. You could ruin a $200 mezuzah easily without any question. So therefore, to be mindful of the same thing is with tefillin as well. Even though that one of the main sofrim in Baltimore, who actually has a sefer on Kesed HaSofer, he's been a sofer for decades and decades. He told me when I spoke to him years ago, he told me that in his 30 years of practice, he hasn't seen that many tefillins that are actually damaged by just being left in the car, in the heat in the car. But then a month later, he calls me up. He says, "You want to come see something?" I remember we had this discussion. I just got the tefillin that's completely damaged, completely ruined by the fact that the guy has always left the tefillin after shaharit until he goes home from work. He's left his talit bag in the car, and the tefillin was completely, totally ruined. All the otiot were stuck to the other side of the tefillin as they had rolled them, and it was, of course, a tefillin that was pasul, the parashiot. So therefore, a person should be careful in that. Those are just side notes, but nevertheless, in our for our purposes, if you have a surah of the ot, it's the looks and the shape of the ot, the letter is not proper, even though that it was written properly in the beginning, still has to be dealt with, and it perhaps could become pasul afterwards as well. If the change of the shape is only in one little part of the letter, not in the whole thing, imagine like the top yud on top of the aleph is missing a kotz of the yud, or something of that nature, or the yud is touching the gag of aleph. Even if you show it to a kid and they read it properly, it doesn't help. If someone could bring the board, I'll show you some of the some of the basics of what this means. So in other words, you have two different parameters here. One is things that are written, they don't have any technical psul, but you're not sure if they look proper. You're not sure if this looks like a vav, or maybe it looks like a resh. It looks like a vav, or maybe it looks like a, bring one of the pencils. Oh, here it is. I have it. Or it looks maybe like a yud. So that is when you give it to a tinok to read. If you have, let's say, something you wanted to write a nun sofit, and you wrote a nun sofit like this, right? You wrote a nun sofit like this. Now you don't know if this looks like a vav or like a nun sofit. Or sometimes this could be by mistake extended a little bit more. And now you don't know if this looks like a nun sofit or a chaf sofit. Right? So you have to ask sometimes a tinok to ask, what do you see exactly here? And they'll read it. If they read it properly, then you'll have it. If not, oftentimes you have, especially in the small tefillins, tefillin that I checked yesterday, it was a small parashiot, and one of the vavs kind of looked like a yud. It was written already small, so it looked like this. So is this a vav or a yud? Yud. Well, that's what you say, right? If you have within the ktav, right? If you have it in the ktav, and this is how it looks, right? Let's say it says ki beforehand. He said it looks like a yud, right? It does look like a yud. But now, give me just a moment. If I erase this, and in the actual ketav, you have the same ot, and you have like this. What does it look like now? It looks like a vav. So it depends. It's not just objective; it's subjective to the ketav as well. And that's something that makes it more complicated than just having the ot itself. So sometimes, therefore, you need, even if you didn't have anything around this could be read by some people as a yud and by some people as a vav. So which one is it? This is when you have kriyat tinok, right?
Why don't we get a 25-year-old with good vision?
Because a 25-year-old with a good vision is very much biased to his knowledge. We don't want their extra intellect, basically affecting their judgment of what this is, even if it's not within. If you have this within, let's say, another word, that they could read the prior letters and afterwards and make a word, for sure that. But even just the person that says, oh, this must have been, the sofer must have wanted, we don't want that. We want just simple. I know Aleph Bet, that's all I know. I'm a 6-year-old, 7-year-old. I don't know how to complicate things, right? So that's what you want. You want just pure Aleph Bet information, not a psychology 101 or a doctorate, right? So that's as far as this is concerned. Now, how about if I have something very different? I have a Aleph that is like this. This is usually how the Aleph is supposed to look like, right?
With the prior Yud Vav scenario, when we show it to the Tinuk, we show only that Yud Vav, or the.
In many cases, we'll get to the details of that. Now imagine this is supposed to be my normal Aleph, right? Now, how about if by mistake this is touching the bottom? Now, instead of being like this, it is written a little bit closer up, right? And the bottom of this is touching, right? Now, if you show this to 10 tinokot, 10 out of 10 are going to read this, an Aleph, right? They'll all tell you that this is an Aleph, but it's pasul because you know this is pasul. This is not a she'ela of the surat ha'otiyot. You know that this is messed up. it doesn't pass the basic parameters of a halachic aleph. Whereas the other case that I erased, the case of Vav versus Yud, right? So it could be a Vav, it could be Yud. It's not missing anything. It just, the question is this long enough to be read by everyone as Vav? It's a borderline, so you need Tino. That's where the Tino comes. But if you know it's Pasur, the reading of the Tinok does not really help the situation. Is that clear? And that's what he's saying over here. So says the Mishna Berurah, Imshina, that if you change some of the Surat Al-Tiyot in Ot Hey, in Mishna Berurah, is not Pasul. Hainu shlo katav tmunat ha'otiyot hamuskarim besfarim, aval tmunat ha'ot mihu sarich. In other words, you were not medaktek in all the details that we're going to see at the end in Mishnat Sofrim, but still looks like an aleph, still looks like an ayin, still looks like the ot that you're trying to write, and still would be kasher. Now, example, you certainly cannot change it to a different ot. For instance, from dalet to reish, or from bet to chaf, right? If you wrote, you're trying to write a bet, and you wrote it like this, then it's for sure pasul, because you wrote the chaf is missing the basic element that makes it a bet, even though that's small element, but nevertheless that would be, if it's missing this, then it's pasul. Same is with dalit, dalit and reish. You have dalit like this, or if it's not visible, I have to do it a little bit bigger here. This is dalit, right? This is what's supposed to be. And if you, or hey would be the same thing. But if you don't have this, and you don't have this, if you wrote the dalit like this, then you don't have a dalit, you have a reish, right? Which is really, if I would want to do it properly, it would be a round on the back, basically. That would be a reish. Now, if you wrote like this, this is still a hey, right? But if you make this come back like this, that little edge would make this to a kosher dalit. So of course, those details matter, because those are the details that make a reish to a dalit, dalit to a reish, a base to a chaf, a chaf to a base, and that's all. Kizeh kol adam. That's all the difference that they have. So you can't write it like this and say, oh well, it looks like a reish. No, it doesn't. Now it's a dalit. Even though that technically speaking, lechatchila, I would write the dalit like what I did before, right? This is how you usually write the dalit. But this is also a dalit. So you can't say that this is a small detail. It's not a small detail. That changes the entire tzura of the ot. Now, nowadays, at some point we'll get to why people should not be buying cheap mezuzahs nowadays, because many of these details are not met, or even the tiyug, right? Even though the tagim in the mezuzah are not ma'akev. If you have a mezuzah without any tagim, still kasher. Rabbi Moshe Feinstein wrote in a tshuva, a person found that the mezuzah doesn't have any tagim, and Rabbi Moshe Feinstein says pasul. Tagim are the crowns that you have. Let's imagine if you have a gimel, a gimel looks like this. A gimel looks like this, right? This is how a gimel looks like, hopefully, right? So a gimel has 3 tagim, 3 crowns. Now these tagim are not ma'akev. If you don't have them, your thing is not pasul, right? Your mezuzah is not pasul. But Rabbi Moshe a mezuzah that didn't have tagim says pasul. So where halacha is that it's not pasul. What do you mean it's pasul? He said if the sofer did not put tagim, it's such a low quality, he didn't put tagim, it means that it's not a sofer that's careful. If you're not careful, it's almost chazakah that you weren't careful in being mekadesh Shem Hashem. When you wrote the Yud Kevavke and the Shemot Shel Nimchakim, and so many other things that you can't detect could go wrong as well. So therefore, it says pasul. Now, nowadays, you find a lot of the tefillins or mezuzahs that their tagim, the proper tag should be like this, right? This is a proper tagim. And especially in the smaller tefillins or mezuzot, you'll find that it's not like this, but it is. You find your tagim that are like this, coming from the same place. That is not the way to do the tagim. Each one of them has to stand by itself. So again, or you find that they have like this small things coming out like this, which is also not proper. So again, the diktuk in having a proper mezuzah or proper tefillin in our case, it's of course important. Sifbet Maran writes, every letter has to be one piece. לכן, לכך צריך להיות בנקודה שעל האלף שהיא כמין יוד, ובנקודה שתחתיה וביודי השין והעין ואחורי צדי, שיהיו נוגעות באות. This is important. There are letters that are written in different stages. So let's say when you write a shin, the way you write a shin is you have 3 yuds and then they get connected, right? You have a yud, another yud, and then you have another one here, and they get connected together with the bottom being like this, and this coming here, and this coming here. This is your regular Sephardi shin, right? Now, if this is not touching, even though that's very super close, but it's not touching, that's pasul, because not one oath. Even though that every tinok would read this a shin, but it's pasul because not touching over here, right? Or if this is not touching the bottom, which could happen also, or this is not touching the bottom. Any of those that are not touching, it would be pasul because it's not golem echad. It's no longer a one-piece thing.
Does it make a difference if the sofer did have to with it, or just left it in this part, then that takes a little bit of it, or water hit it?
Yes, it does make a difference. We're not going to get into that right now, but certainly imagine if it was written like this, then it's pasul because the shin is not touching the yud of the shin, or ayin in the same thing would be with ayin, or with any of the other othiyot that are similar, right? When you have an ayin here, so this also you want it to be touching, everything has to be touching. This has to be touching here, this has to be touching here. And if they're not, so then you're in big trouble. Says the Shulchan Aruch, וכן בשאר אותיות חוץ מה' וכוף, by hey and kuf, of course, the left leg should not be touching. So when you have the hey we already did, and the kuf also would be a similar thing, you want the kuf and hey to be separate on the top. You don't want this to be touching, of course. But aside from kuf and hey, all the other ones are golem achat. They're supposed to be one piece. These are the exceptions. So says Shulchan Aruch, aside from these two, that they have 2 parts to them, the rest of them are all one part, and therefore they should be touching. If they're not touching, it's pasul. Okay. Says Maran, if they touch by kuf and hey, is the opposite. If they touch, then it becomes pasul. So therefore, of course, a person has to be mindful of that and careful. Now, Maran writes in Sif Gimel, Sarich letayeg shatnas gats. The otiot of Shin, Ayin, Tet, Nun, Zayin, Gimel, and Tzadik need tagim, right? As we just showed, and this is not the proper tagim now here, but the way we did it before, you need to have tagim on, this is one of them, of Shatnas Gas, this is Gimel, but Shin, Ayin, Nun, Tet, all of those otiot of Shatnas Gas, they need tiyug as well, and says the Shulchan Aruch v'asofrim na'agu, and the sofrim have developed a minhag letayeg otiot acherot, to put tagim on other otiot as well. Ve'im lo tiyeg afilu shatnas gas lo pasal. As we mentioned 2 minutes ago, if you did not put tagim even on shatnas gas, still it's not pasul, still kasher, right? But you should do that. So says the Shulchan Aruch, the Mishna Berurah rather, the tayeg afilu b'sefer Torah. Even in Sefer Torah, you have to have the tagim, and kol shken betfilin u'mezuzot goes without saying that tefillin and mezuzot are more important than Sefer Torah in tagim, that they should have it. And the Kaf Chaim writes that a person, this is really from Sefer Asiyah Ya'ar, that a person should do tagim, the tiyug, as we say. The tiyug also should be done lishma. When you put the tagim, also should be the Shem Kedushat Tefillin, Shem Kedushat Mezuzah. But if you didn't do it, it's not ma'akev, it's fine, right? Now, can you do the tiyug with a pen, with a regular pen, the calligraphy pen? Because again, especially if you're talking about small tefillin, try to do that with a kulmus, and little extra ink is going to ruin the whole thing if you have. So can you do a tiyug with a regular pen, which would make it much easier and faster for the sofrim to accomplish? So Uliyan tiyug be'et, he writes over here, yesh katvu she'im hubrar hadavar she'en me'orav b'diyo davar she'eno kasher mutar letayeg ba'af lechatchila. If you know that the yo is all synthetic, and it's not containing anything that's asur to eat, anything that's animal fat or whatever it's going to be asur, hechsher wise, then those who say even lechatchila you could do it, and it has become kind of the minhag of the sofrim to do it in that way. The rest of this Bezrat Hashem we're going to continue in the days to come. חנניה בן עכשווה ורצה הקדוש ברוך הוא לזכות את ישראל, לפיכך ירבה להם תורה ומצוות, שנאמר אדוני חפץ למען צדקו יגדיל תורה ויאדיר.